All right, so the next question is this: does the fact that God requires all those to believe the true faith and to be united to His Holy Catholic Church to be saved, does that go against the infinite goodness of God? That's the question that Bishop Hay is going to address now. And the accusation is that if this is what God requires, then it goes against the infinite goodness of God, because majority of mankind, it is obvious, doesn't believe the true faith and is not united to the Holy Catholic Church. That the vast majority don't. And so that would mean that the vast majority will be lost. So that's the accusation. Like, if God really does require this, well, that means most people will go to hell. The situation we're in is that because of our first parents, we've all inherited original sin. So he starts off by saying that for there we learn that man, by the voluntary abuse of his free will, lost that happy state in which God, out of pure goodness, had created him, and rendered himself totally unworthy of any favor or mercy from God. So, as Catholics, we believe that the first human being, the first man, Adam, was created in a state of perfect righteousness, in a state of grace, free from sin, in a state of holiness and righteousness and justice, free from sin, in union with God, and that he freely chose to disobey the command in the garden not to eat of the fruit. And when that happened, which he did freely, okay, he freely chose to do this. When that happened, God withdrew his grace from that man and left him to himself, which resulted in death. Okay, his death being given into to his passions, that his mind and his thinking were darkened, and so forth, so that he is prone to sin, prone to the lust of the flesh and his passion. His reason is darkened, and his reason is influenced by his own sinful and fallen passions. And that is and in that state, no man can in any way be able to come to the knowledge of the truth, could even in any way find God and know God and save their souls without the grace of God. It's impossible. Bishop Hay says that God, without any breach of justice, nay, with the greatest justice, could, if he pleased, could have left him without remedy, a prey to that misery which his sins deserved, as he did with the fallen angels. So the angels did something similar. They chose to rebel against God, and God casted them out and chose to not provide a remedy for salvation for them. He left them because he didn't need to. He's not required to. In justice, he's not required to do that. So the same thing with us in our own fallen state, that in the benefits we had, that the first man had, Adam, in his state of righteousness and with a perfectly aligned reason, with a nature that wasn't prone to sin and all that, were gifts of God that he bestowed upon the first man. Okay, so that those things could be taken away if he chose to rebel against God. Man in this fallen state could do nothing on their own. They could not save their own souls. They were in a kind of helpless situation, and God, in his mercy and goodness, chose freely to provide a means by which God would save them, and that is by sending his son into the world to die on the cross. He says that God provided this remedy for salvation, this remedy to our lost state by providing this particular, but providing the means by the conditions for which we are to be saved, which is to believe the true faith and to be united to his holy Catholic Church. That's what he requires man to do. And in order for that to be able to happen, God in his goodness chose, through the merits of Jesus Christ, to provide grace to every individual so that they have the ability, by cooperating with God's grace, to come to that truth and to save their souls. So here he says that, therefore God, out of the boundless riches of his goodness and the sincere desire that he has that all should be saved, says, through the merits of Jesus Christ, gives to all mankind, in whatever state of condition they be, such supernatural helps of his grace as he sees proper for their present state, with a view of their salvation. That is to say, by these graces he moves them and enables them to do some present good, or withdraws from them and enables them to avoid some present evil, with this view that if they cooperate with this heavenly motion of his grace, he will give them more and greater graces. And if they continue their correspondence with those, he will go on to give them still more, till he bring them at last to the true faith and Church of Christ, and to a happy end. So every human being is given, because of the merits of Jesus Christ, by the mercy and goodness of God, every human being is given grace. Okay? Every human being is given grace, a measure of grace depending upon their own state, and as God chooses to distribute. But every human being is given grace. And if they cooperate with that grace by moving to some good and accepting certain things or whatever, then more grace will be given to that person. As they continue to cooperate with God's grace, they'll receive more grace until eventually they'll be brought to the truth, to the knowledge of the truth, and be saved. If he says, so every human being has this. Every human being is given this grace, and every human being can freely cooperate with it. Some choose to, and some choose not to. Okay, and he says, but if they resist his graces, if they abuse them and act contrary to them, if they reject these calls and offers of mercy which God gives them, this abuse and ingratitude, God, out of his infinite goodness, bears with it for a while. Right? He says he'll tolerate it for a minute. They'll lose a little bit. He'll tolerate, but then if they cooperate some more, they'll get more grace in order to go toward the knowledge of the truth. Then they might sin in some way, or reject his grace, or take his grace for granted, and they'll fall back, and then they'll be more and more darkened. And if they continue to cooperate in sin, whatever, they get more and more darkened, to eventually to a point that God will give them over. Right? And he says, till at length he stops the continuation of such undeserved favors to them, and leaves them to perish in their own obstinacy and ingratitude. So there's no way in which God is not, that his goodness, just because a majority of mankind have apparently rejected the church or are not part of it and do not have the true faith or don't know about the true faith, is in no way, and that God still requires them to be united to the church and to have the true faith to save their souls, and that the majority of mankind will go to hell, will not be saved, as in no ways impugns against the infinite goodness of God, because God in his infinite goodness has provided the means for every human being to save their souls if they choose freely to do so. Okay? God doesn't, force people to be saved. God doesn't just like some Protestant sects will say that God just he goes in and saves the soul, without their will. If he just he goes in and infuses salvation to them, and then whatever. No, God doesn't just save. God doesn't just save people without their will to do so, without their cooperation, without their free will. God provides salvation, but God expects the people to cooperate with the graces that He's given. That's just the reality of it. And if they choose not to, then they choose not to. And if they choose to cooperate, then they will. But God has provided every person the means to do it. Okay? Every person has that means. There's nobody on earth, no matter where they live, who they are, where they belong, that doesn't have this prevenient grace that God gives to all people to come to the knowledge of the truth. Nobody is born condemned to hell. Okay? Nobody's predestined to hell. Okay? Nobody's predestined to hell. Everyone is predestined to receive the graces and merits of God through what Christ accomplished on the cross. And then so basically it says, hence, if the greater part of mankind be lost, this is wholly owing to themselves in abusing the goodness of God and resisting the means He uses for their salvation. So that our salvation is only from the goodness of God, and our perdition wholly from ourselves, according to what He says by His prophet, destruction is thine, O Israel, thy help is only in me.